Luffy didn't stretch like rubber. He rooted like a forest. Shanks' crew still laughed and drank in Fuchsia Village. A strange fruit still sat in a box, guarded only by a warning. Don't eat this. And a reckless kid still took a bite the second nobody was looking. But when that kid started choking, it wasn't his arms that stretched. It was bark that crept over his skin. Vines burst from his fingers, drilling through the floorboards. Roots tore through the deck of the Red Hair Pirate's ship as everyone leapt back in shock. That was the day the East Blue met, the boy who became a forest. Today, we're walking through a full alternate timeline of One Piece. What changes if Luffy never eats the gum-gum fruit, and instead eats the forest fruit, a paramecia that turns him into a living ecosystem? We'll follow him saga by saga, from East Blue all the way to Wano and beyond, to answer one big question. If Luffy grows like a wild forest instead of bouncing like rubber, can he still become the Pirate King? Let's start where it all begins. The basics don't change. Luffy grows up in Fuchsia Village, idolizing Shanks. He declares he'll become Pirate King. He's stubborn, reckless, and absolutely serious about his dream. What does change is the way the adults react when that weird fruit kicks in. Instead of Shanks grabbing a rubber child by his stretchy arm, the crew has to literally hack free a panicking kid whose legs have rooted into the planks. Luffy's skin hardens in patches like bark. Thin green veins pulse under his skin like plant roots. When he swings his arm in confusion, a whip of vines snaps out, shattering a barrel. Fuchsia Village is terrified. To the locals, a rubber boy is mostly silly. A boy whose body is fusing with the ship and sprouting thorns? That feels like a monster story. Luffy learns very early that his power freaks people out. But Shanks laughs, smacks him on the head anyway, and treats it like just another devil fruit quirk. From day one, the Forest fruit has clear rules. It's a paramecia, not a logia. Luffy isn't intangible. He can transform parts of his body into wood, bark, leaves, and vines. He can root himself into surfaces and rapidly grow plant matter, but that growth costs him stamina and needs support, soil, water, sunlight, and his own nutrition. He still can't swim, still sinks like a stone, and sea stone shuts everything down. The core difference from rubber is his combat identity. Gum Gum Luffy goes straight in, punching harder and taking hits with elastic resilience. Forest Luffy has to think about positioning and environment from the very beginning. On Alvida's ship, that shows immediately. When she swings her iron mace, Luffy's instinct is to block, and his forearm hardens into bark. The impact cracks the wood, but not the bone. At the same time, vines lance from his feet, punching through the deck, anchoring him. When he counters, it's not a long-range punch, it's a sudden burst of roots that wrap around Alvida's legs, slam her to the floor, and pin her there as he decks her with a normal fist. He's still a brawler, but now every swing leaves gouges of roots and splinters behind. His first bounty posters spread stories. That kid whose body turns into a forest. Marines in the East Blue start hearing that this rookie captain isn't just weird, he's unnerving. With Zoro, Nami, and Usopp, the emotional beats stay familiar. Zoro respects Luffy's insane conviction more than the fruit. Nami wants a ride and her freedom. Usopp sees a monster captain and immediately starts bragging that they're best friends. But battles shift. Against Buggy, Luffy's early forest powers are both an advantage and a trap. On one hand, he can pin Buggy's dismembered limbs with roots, literally stapling flying hands and feet into the ground. On the other hand, because Buggy can separate himself, Luffy's grabs and entangling moves lose a lot of value. The four-finger punch that works so well in canon isn't there. Instead, he's yanking on arms that can detach at will. To win, Forest Luffy has to change tactics fast. He anchors himself to the ground so Buggy can't blow him away, then focuses on locking down Buggy's core body while letting the stray parts fly around uselessly. It's messy. Vines wave around, swords get yanked aside, and the town square ends up covered in splintered wood and cracked cobblestone where roots force themselves through the stone. By the time he frees Orange Town, sailors and civilians have a new rumor to whisper. There's a rookie whose body becomes tangled roots, whose fists grow thorns when he gets serious. Luffy, being Luffy, barely thinks about it. He just knows this power is his, and he'll use it to get a crew, find One Piece, and be free. But there's one lesson he starts learning much earlier than in canon. He isn't just a guy who hits harder. He's an ecosystem that has to adapt. If he doesn't use the battlefield, he loses. That mindset becomes crucial as he heads for the Grand Line. With the full East Blue crew assembled, Zoro, Nami, Usopp, Sanji, Luffy sails toward Reverse Mountain. His forest fruit has matured a bit already. He can extend vines for several meters, wrap masts, and reinforce bulwarks with wooden growth when the going merry takes a hard hit. As they climb Reverse Mountain, his roots anchor into the deck and even into cracks in the coating, getting extra stability while the others steer. But it's Nami's navigation that keeps them alive. Luffy's powers don't replace seamanship. They just give the ship a bit more grip on the impossible current. Whiskey Peak is where the fruit's utility starts to shine. Luffy's roots act like an early danger sense. He can feel vibrations through the ground when people move. When Baroque Works agents try to ambush the crew at night, his vines quietly slip under doorways and along walls, tying shoes together, yanking weapons aside, and tripping attackers before they even reach the bedrooms. He doesn't realize it, but he's taking the first baby steps toward treating the battlefield as an extension of his body. Little Garden is thematically perfect. A prehistoric jungle island meets a boy who is half forest. Luffy is in his element. He swings between giant trees on his own vines, races along thick branches, and casually grows temporary ladders and bridges for his crew. But he also bumps into limitations. This island is already densely forested. His plants are counterproductive if he overgrows an area and blocks visibility. He begins to learn restraint, using roots to sense movement underfoot, weaving small living shields instead of smothering everything. Drum Island flips that advantage on its head. Snow, ice, and bitter cold are brutal for plant life. Luffy can still harden his skin into wood, but it becomes brittle. His vines, once flexible whips, stiffen and crack in the wind. When he climbs that cliff to carry Nami up the mountain, he tries to drive roots into the icy rock, and they slip. He ends up using his own fingers, nails tearing, breath steaming, his plant powers more hindrance than help. That suffering is important. Drum forces Luffy to understand that his fruit isn't a straight-line power-up. It has conditions. Without heat, moisture, and fertile material, his forest is weak. Fire, frost, dryness, and salt can all stunt his growth. He's not a walking miracle. He's still a human with a weird body, one that can be starved and frozen. Chopper joins the crew into that framework. As a doctor, he's uniquely positioned to study Luffy's hybrid biology. He notices that when Luffy overuses the fruit, his human body shows signs of nutrient drain, fatigue, dehydration, even minor bark rot that has to heal like wounds. This sets up a long-term rule. Massive plant constructions aren't free. They rob Luffy's own reserves. By the end of the early Grand Line stretch, the crew has seen enough to realize, if this power ever fully blossoms, it could reshape entire battles, or entire islands. The question is, what happens when a living forest sails into a kingdom of sand? Crocodile's Alabasta is the perfect antagonist environment for the forest fruit. Crocodile is a man who controls sand and drought. Luffy is a boy whose power thrives on water and life. The desert immediately punishes him. Under the burning sun, with almost no moisture in the soil, his vines struggle to sprout. He can harden his skin into wood for defense, but extended growth cracks and withers fast. Every time he pushes a root through the sand, it crumbles away before it can anchor. Early skirmishes with Baroque Works leave him more exhausted than usual. Chopper and Vivi notice that he drinks water like a camel and basks in shade whenever he can. Nami starts obsessively checking their routes to keep them near oases and riverbeds, because that's where Luffy's strength spikes. When he finally clashes with Crocodile, the matchup feels even worse than canon. Crocodile's dry sand slices through Luffy's vines like dead twigs. His powers literally desiccate Luffy's plant limbs, and every sandstorm he unleashes strips away the thin moisture in the air. Luffy punches with wood-coated fists and gets them crumbled into splinters. He launches roots to bind Crocodile, only to see them shrivel into dust when Crocodile drains them. The first fight goes horribly. Luffy gets impaled and buried just like canon, but the imagery is different. A half-wooden body lying in a desert tomb, roots feebly reaching out into lifeless sand. He survives thanks to his stubborn heart and allies, but his conclusion is bitterly simple. In a dead land, his forest can't win alone. The rematch forces him to think like an ecosystem, fighting back from the edge of extinction. He remembers small details: underground water lines, hidden canals, shady spots between buildings, and abandoned wells. He soaks himself beforehand, storing as much moisture as his hybrid body can hold. He has Usopp and choppers supply him with seed bombs, little pods packed with fast-growing plant material that feed off any hint of humidity. The second fight against Crocodile becomes a war of resources. Luffy drives roots deep, searching for even a trickle of underground water to tap. When he finds a buried water vein under the plaza, he latches onto it. His roots swell, anchoring him against Crocodile's sandstorms. He uses that stolen water to fuel a surge of growth, wooden armor thick enough to blunt sand blades, thorned vines that resist total desiccation, and even small bursts of green pushing through cracked stone. The desert doesn't suddenly bloom, but there are flashes, life forcing itself into a realm of death. Crocodile still has Logia intangibility and lethal techniques. Haki isn't in play yet. Luffy wins the same way he always does, by refusing to stay down. But his final blow isn't just a soaked punch. It's a fist wrapped in hardened bark and thorns. Driven by a trunk-like arm, he forces to grow thicker right before impact, cracking through Crocodile's sand body, once he's been weakened and partially solidified. When the dust settles, the image of Luffy and Alabasta is different. In canon, he collapses on a stone platform. Here, he collapses surrounded by small patches of new growth. Roots he punched through the square, little weeds that have sprouted from his runoff water, a hint of green in a kingdom that had been turning to dust. To Alabasta, he's not just a savior who toppled a warlord. He's the boy whose very existence defied the desert, who used a life-based power to help restore a dying land. As the crew sails away, the desert fades behind them, and they look up. The next destination isn't a wasteland, it's a sea of clouds. On Jaya, Luffy's forest powers are relatively grounded again. Street brawls in Mocktown go much like canon, except he occasionally slams thugs into living walls of wood, or uses a quick burst of roots to trip entire gangs at once. When Bellamy mocks dreams, Luffy's fist connecting with his face leaves a splatter of splinters and leaves on the bar wall. But it's in the sky where things get wild. Skypiea is humid, bright, and strange. The island rests on island clouds instead of stone, which is tricky. Luffy's roots can't burrow into cloud the way they do into earth. At first, this is a huge problem. He tries to anchor himself and punches straight through soft cloud without gaining purchase. He adapts by changing his approach. Instead of driving roots into the ground, he grows broad, flat plant structures on top of the cloud surface. Floating lily pad platforms, vine bridges, and makeshift canopies that spread out and distribute weight. He can throw down seeds that erupt into stepping stones of hardened wood, creating improvised paths over open air. Visually, Skypiea with Forest Luffy becomes a web of hanging branches and platforms, a vertical jungle slowly emerging in the sky. Canon Luffy has a natural hard counter to lightning. Forest Luffy doesn't. In fact, he's vulnerable. Wood and plant matter can be scorched and burned. A bolt of lightning can travel through his body. The fight becomes a terrifying test of ingenuity. Luffy learns quickly that letting Enel hit his main body directly is suicide. Instead, he starts using his forest as layers of sacrificial armor and decoys. He wraps himself in thick, wet bark shells. He grows hollow wooden bodies as false targets, letting Enel blast them apart while he hides behind or below. He uses vines to push chunks of wood and cloud into the path of lightning strikes, forcing Enel to waste energy. Enel's mantra, his observation, struggles slightly against this kind of terrain. When entire sections of Upper Yard are overgrown with Luffy's plants, the noise of life complicates his sensing. Luffy exploits that. He spreads roots everywhere, some animated, some not, so that to Enel's electrical sensing, the island starts to feel like a buzzing mess of life signals. He is still outmatched in raw power. Lightning tears through his defenses again and again. Luffy probably ends up badly charred more than once, only surviving because his hybrid biology lets him regenerate plant material if his human core is intact. The decisive moment isn't immunity, it's timing. Luffy waits until Enel commits to his grand plan, focused on Maxim and fair weather. Then, in a desperate gambit, Luffy uses every scrap of water he can gather. Stored moisture in his body, barrels from the ship, rain from Nami, to grow a towering, insulated column of wood and vines that launches him up toward Enel's position, like a living beanstalk. As lightning crashes down, he repeatedly sheds outer layers of bark, letting them take the damage, while his real body burrows forward through the trunk, like a seed drilling upward. When he finally reaches Enel, it's not because wood is stronger than lightning. It's because his will pushed through fear and pain, and he used his fruit in the smartest way possible, defeating the self-proclaimed god on a floating mass of wood and leaves, surrounded by a forest that he forced into the sky, cements a new reality. Luffy's power isn't about being the strongest element, it's about turning every battlefield into his ecosystem, no matter how impossible. Back on the sea, word spreads. There's a pirate whose body turns battlefields into living jungles, who overgrew part of a sky island. For the world government, that's a red flag. A man who can reshape terrain at will is dangerous, and that danger is only going to grow. When the Straw Hats reach Water 7, Luffy's powers are now large and wild enough that they affect daily life on the ship. If he gets too excited, roots pop through the deck. Frankie, once he joins, will have opinions about that. For now, the Going Merry's slow death still hurts the same. Luffy might try to reinforce the hull with wood from his own body, but it doesn't fix the keel. A living patch job can't solve fundamental structural damage. That frustration, having a power tied to wood and ships, yet being helpless to save their first home, hurts him deeply. In Water 7's streets, Luffy uses roots and vines to second-guess opponents, grabbing ankles through cobblestone cracks, wrapping lampposts to swing into attacks. But it's Enies Lobby, where his forest identity explodes on a new scale. Storming the judicial island, Luffy starts doing to stone what he previously did to soil, forcing roots into it. He learns that with enough effort and stamina, he can crack even solid masonry, growing vine networks through walls and floors. Corridors become tangled tunnels. Agents find themselves disarmed when their pistols are literally swallowed by blossoms and their swords pinned by roots. He also learns restraint. He can't just overgrow everything. His crew needs clear paths. Zoro and Sanji carve roots through the living maze, while Robin and Nami use the cover to hide and flank. The world sees broadcast images of vines coiling up government towers, roots smashing through courthouse walls, and a pirate captain whose silhouette is half man, half tree, shouting that he'll burn down the flag of the world government. That symbolism is powerful, nature reclaiming an oppressive structure. Then comes Lucci. Lucci is still a speed monster with lethal Rokushiki. Forest tricks help, but not enough. He cuts through vines, dodges roots, and hammers Luffy's wooden armor with devastating blows. This is where Luffy needs a next-level evolution, his answer to Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd, but tailored to a forest body. Instead of pumping blood through rubber, Luffy learns to compress and store his plant growth like coiled springs. He discovers that he can pack dense, layered wood inside his limbs, like tree rings under pressure, then rapidly expand or contract them. Gear equivalent for Forest Luffy might look like this: a form where he drastically compresses plant tissue into his muscles, making his body denser and faster for short bursts. His legs fill with tight, spiraled roots that release like loaded springs, launching him at incredible speed. A form where he rapidly grows massive, trunk-like limbs for a single devastating blow, then sheds them as splintering shells, returning to a leaner form to keep moving. Against Lucci, Luffy cycles through these forms in desperation. He hardens bark armor to survive Shigan and Rankyaku. He uses compressed root mass in his legs to break past Lucci's Soru-level speed. When he punches, his arm expands into a thick log mid-swing, adding weight and impact, not by stretching, but by sudden growth. Their clash still pushes him to the brink. He still takes brutal damage protecting Robin's future. The crew's emotional moment, declaring war on the world government, trusting their captain as he literally tears down the gates of justice, rings just as loud. But one thing is unmistakable now. To the world, Luffy is no longer just a chaotic rookie. He's a man whose fruit is maturing into something monstrous. If a half-trained Forest user can overgrow parts of Enies Lobby, what happens if that ability ever truly awakens? Only one way to find out. Keep growing, even through the darkest seas. Thriller Bark is a playground for contrasts. On an island of stolen shadows, zombies, and drained life, Luffy's living forest power feels like a rebuke to everything Moria stands for. His vines and roots are especially effective against zombies, not because they purify them, but because they don't fear pain or fatigue. He can literally pin zombie hordes into the ground, wrapping them in thickets so tight they can barely move. Even when they rip free, they lose limbs and speed. Moria's shadow-stealing ability interacts interestingly with the fruit. When Luffy loses his shadow, his plant growth slows and weakens, less will, less life force driving it. When he gains that massive Nightmare Luffy-style power-up, a Forest-Forest twist might manifest as an explosive overrunning of the castle, with trees punching through floors and enormous vines swatting giant zombies. But post-Thriller Bark, the tone shifts. Sabaody Archipelago is full of giant mangroves, a natural fit for Luffy. He can interface with the roots, feeling the heartbeat of the island. He protects Kami and fights the human auction like cannon, except when he punches a celestial dragon, the fist that lands is jagged with bark and thorn. That single blow triggers the collapse of a situation even harder. A pirate whose power screams wild, uncontrollable nature just assaulted a world noble. When Kizaru and the pacifistas arrive, Luffy tries everything. He overgrows the ground to slow down PX-4, builds wooden shields, but lasers burn straight through plant armor. Kuma's paw still sends them flying. Luffy's power, as vast as it's become, is useless against the overwhelming authority and tech of the world government. His helpless rage in that moment is the same as cannon. Roots claw uselessly at the empty air where his friends used to stand. Marineford, however, is where Forest Luffy's fruit reaches a haunting level of symbolism. He crashes into a frozen bay turned battlefield, a boy of living wood amid steel, fire, and ice. As he sprints through chaos, he instinctively uses his forest to protect, not just to fight. He raises wooden barricades against stray cannon fire. Roots slam up through broken stone to catch falling allies. When buildings topple, he grows bracing pillars to halt their collapse on wounded marines and pirates alike. He doesn't selectively save, he just reacts, like a forest trying to preserve as much life as possible in a storm. Against admirals, nothing changes. Akainu's magma annihilates his plants, boiling away moisture and burning wood to ash. Aokiji's ice freezes his vines solid. Kizaru burns holes through trunks with light. The fruit doesn't make him a match for gods of war. It just lets him struggle a little more dramatically. Ace still dies. Luffy still screams. In that moment, his forest rages uselessly. Roots exploding from the cracked battlefield, only to be melted, frozen, or shattered by the top tiers around him. If anything, the fruit makes the tragedy sharper. The boy of life fails to save the brother whose fire should have been his natural ally. After Marineford, when he breaks down with Jinbei, his power recedes. Bark fades, roots calm. He looks more human, smaller, weaker. That's when he decides he has to grow, not just stronger, but wiser. He has to learn to use this fruit not as a wild overgrowth, but as a controlled, resilient ecosystem. 2 years of training on Rusukaina await. A perfect crucible for a forest-forest awakening. During the time skip, Rayleigh teaches Luffy Haki, but the environment teaches him something else. How to connect his fruit to the world at scale. On Rusukaina, with its extreme seasons and dangerous beasts, Luffy learns to expand his senses through roots, feeling footsteps, heartbeats, even shifts in weather through plant networks. He practices rapid terrain conversion, turning bare ground into dense underbrush in seconds, or collapsing growth back into seeds to conserve energy. He experiments with creating hollow wooden constructs for mobility, a sort of living gear. When he reunites with the crew at Sabaody, he's transformed. He moves differently, more sure of where his feet land, using subtle root pushes to accelerate, letting vines catch him out of the air. Haki wraps his wooden fists in invisible armor, finally giving his plant-based strikes the power to clash with Logia's. Fishman Island challenges him in a new way. Underwater, plant growth is tricky, but not impossible. Luffy figures out how to grow flexible coral-like structures and seaweed constructs inside air bubbles, reinforcing Noah's interior briefly, or throwing out floating rafts of wood for civilians. Water still counters him. If he's submerged directly, he's helpless. Jinbei becomes crucial as both protector and tutor in understanding the sea as an ally and a threat. Punk Hazard pushes his weaknesses to extremes. The burning half of the island is a nightmare, constant heat and fire that threaten to ignite anything he grows. The icy half risks freezing his vines brittle. Luffy has to rely heavily on deer-like compressed forms, using minimal, well-armored growth close to his body, rather than big flashy forests that could be incinerated or shattered. His fight with Caesar Clown emphasizes Haki and sheer determination over fruit abuse. Then comes Dressrosa, where his fruit finally has the perfect stage, a complex, crowded urban battlefield. In a city full of alleys, plazas, and underground passages, Luffy can create safety nets everywhere. He throws seeds that burst into instant cover for civilians. He grows living bridges between rooftops, lets Usopp use vine slings as sniper nests, and shields entire streets from falling debris with improvised canopies. Doflamingo, however, is a nightmare matchup. String powers give him aerial control and his own form of battlefield manipulation. He can slice through vines, puppet civilians, and stay above Luffy's rooted control zones by flying on threads. Luffy learns to fight vertically with his forest. He grows tall, spiraling trunks to chase Doflamingo into the sky. He uses branching paths as launch pads. His gear equivalents now combine compression and growth. Dense root muscles for speed, trunk arms for power, all coated in armament haki. The fight culminates much like Canon's Gear 4th clash, but with a different aesthetic. Instead of a rubber balloon man, we get a compact, armored Luffy, whose limbs are encased in layered bark plates, haki darkened, with root muscles bulging underneath. When he attacks, he releases compressed growth in explosive bursts, sending haki-coated wooden fists hurtling at Doflamingo like pile-driving battering rams. As the birdcage closes, Luffy performs one last gambit. He throws down every remaining seed and scrap of stamina to grow a last-minute safety net across key streets, catching civilians and preventing total slaughter while he goes all in on taking Doflamingo down. By the end of Dressrosa, the world has seen that when Forest Luffy gets serious, cityscapes themselves start to change. The idea that his fruit might one day affect entire islands stops being hypothetical. But there are still 2 emperors and 1 unbeatable dragon waiting. Whole Cake Island is a test of subtlety. Big Mom's territory is already full of sentient, semi-living things, homies made from souls, animated forests, and talking sweets. Luffy's forest doesn't override that. The forest fruit manipulates plant life, not souls. He can overgrow or constrict homie trees physically, but he can't control them like Big Mom does. His power shines instead in escape and protection. Chased through the seducing woods, he uses his own plants to counter the forest's tricks, creating straight, living ropes for Nami to follow, marking paths with distinctive flowers, and smothering deceptive homies with his own vines. Against Katakuri, the fight remains a clash of future sight and advanced haki more than fruit powers. Luffy learns to refine his forest forms to keep up with the trident and mochi, limiting growth to keep his silhouette honest and not telegraph attacks. It's in Wano that the forest fruit finally awakens. Wano is a land of mountains, forests, and closed borders, but it's also poisoned by factories and stripped of life in many regions. Luffy sees villages starving, rivers polluted, and hills deforested by Orochi and Kaido's industry. For a boy whose power is literally life, that hits hard. During his time in Udon prison, as he trains haki and fights day after day, he also connects with Wano's soil. Even in the toxic mines, there's a memory of forests. His roots find traces of it. Slowly, he figures out how to flip the switch of his fruit, not just growing plants on land, but making the land itself become his forest. Awakening for the forest fruit works like this. Any surface within a certain radius can become fertile ground for his power, regardless of its original state. Stone, steel, and poisoned earth all start to sprout when he wills it. He doesn't just grow plants. He turns the battlefield into a living domain. In Onigashima, once he reaches that point of despair and determination against Kaido, he finally triggers it. Suddenly, the Skull Dome's roof cracks as massive roots burst upward. Corridors fill with creeping vines. Support beams thicken into living pillars bending to his will. The entire island groans as it becomes host to an emerging forest. It's not infinite. Every meter of growth costs him tremendous stamina. But within that domain, he has advantages he's never had before. Allies find themselves saved by sudden wooden shields or root bridges. Enemies stumble as the ground shifts under their feet, or walls sprout thorns that push them into choke points. Luffy can feel every heavy footfall through the network, tracking Kaido's movements even when he's launched into the sky. Kaido, of course, is Kaido. Dragonfire roars, burning swathes of the awakened forest. Thunder and wind tear up roots. His raw strength and haki let him rip through wooden armor and smash living bulwarks. The fight's heart doesn't change. It's Luffy's will versus an overwhelming monster. But now, every blow Luffy lands has the support of a world that's literally rising up with him. His awakened form might combine dense tree trunk fists, advanced armament, and conqueror's hockey, and a constant feedback from the terrain, like fighting with the island at his back. When he finally defeats Kaido, Wano's skies clear over not just a broken fortress, but an island that started to heal faster because of his interference. Roots stabilizing cliffs, sprouts taking hold in polluted soil, the first hints of green in areas choked by industry. Forest Luffy doesn't become Pirate King because he's the strongest plant user. He gets there the same way Canon Luffy does, because he refuses to stop, grows past every limit, and inspires people everywhere he goes. His power just makes that theme literal. He spreads life in a dying world. He breaks stone structures that represent oppression. He gives his crew and allies terrain where they can be free. When he sails into the final saga, his reputation isn't just Rubber Man who took down Kaido. It's the pirate whose very footsteps leave forests behind. A man whose awakening could, in theory, reshape entire islands. The world government isn't just afraid of what he'll learn from the poneglyphs. They're afraid of what will happen if a boy who hates cages gains the power to snap any prison like a dead branch. Can this Luffy still become Pirate King? Absolutely. The Pirate King is the freest man on the sea. Canon Luffy embodies freedom by bending, stretching, and refusing to break. Forest Luffy embodies it by expanding, rooting deeply, and turning every hostile place into somewhere his friends can thrive. One reaches for the sky like a rubber band. The other grows toward it like a tree. Both chase the same horizon. So now I want to hear from you. With the Forest-Forest fruit, which matchup do you think changes the most? Crocodile in the desert, Anil in the sky, or Doflamingo in the city? And what wild awakened ability did I miss that you'd give to Forest Luffy? Let me know your takes, your power ideas, and your alternate battles in the comments.